For exercises where you stand on the loop resistance bands, here are 2 rules I like to follow in order to make sure I set up the exercises correctly. For this, I'll be using 4 different pieces of equipment, and they are as follows. I'll be using loop resistance bands, and these are the under sun resistance bands that I've been using for quite a while. Next up is the Instar resistance bands bar, which is a 30-inch bar I use alongside the resistance bands in order to make many of the exercises more comfortable and standardizes how I do the exercises. Attaching to that resistance bands bar will be 2 triangle links. So many people ask where I get these links. Feel free to check out the description to see if they are available, and they are the M10 3/8-inch versions. And the 4th and final item is the step platform, which is a platform 4 inches off the ground I stand on, and the loop bands go underneath. With that, here are the 2 rules that I like to follow in order to make sure I'm setting up the exercise properly. Rule number 1 is that if when you are standing, your hands or the bar are at waist height or lower, you are going to double loop the band underneath the step platform or your feet. By double looping the band, it will make this exercise quite a bit harder as there will be more tension on the band overall. So you might not need to add additional bands if you're using the heaviest one for these exercises. Some exercise examples that would use this setup would be the Romanian deadlift, a bent over row, or standing calf raises. And on to rule number 2, if you are standing and your hands are at waist height or higher, you're going to only single loop the band underneath the step platform. While this will reduce the overall tension, it'll allow your hands to come up by your chest and even up over your shoulders and head, whereas a double loop would probably prevent that, and with a double loop you probably actually snap the bands as they might not be able to stretch that far. And some example exercises for this are the front squat, the overhead press, a standing biceps curl, and a standing overhead triceps extension. So by following these 2 rules, this should allow you to quickly navigate and set up the exercises much more quickly. Now, if this is the first time you've ever done it, you might want to take some time and make sure you set it up the right way. But once you've done it a few times, it's become second nature, and I can set these up very, very fast. Also, if you don't have the bar, you can set it up the exact same way by just standing on the bands. Again, anything below the waist, you double up the band underneath your feet. Anything waist or higher, you're just going to hold the band itself through your palms and do the same method. But just note, for me, I've always felt that this was far more uncomfortable having the bands through the hands in this way. Now, if you decide to go with just the bands and not use the resistance bands bar, I would recommend that you take a look at some of the gloves that are out there to help protect your hands, as the bands can rip them up pretty good, especially if you're someone who hasn't done this before. I personally own the Undersun gloves. They are rather expensive, so you could look at other options, but those are the ones that I currently own. And of course, remember when you're doing this, the goal is to progress with more resistance over time. So as you get into the setup, you do it over time. Make sure you're adding more resistance, even maybe additional bands to your setup to progress with overall resistance, and track it to make sure you're getting in the reps you need with the proper resistance. And as I mentioned before, with my actual setup, you do standardize the exercises quite a bit, meaning that you're using the step platform to always get the same amount of tension on those bands because they're coming around the edges the same way, and the bar is the same width, so you're always attaching it to the same kind of setup. Whereas if you're just using your feet and holding the bands, you can grab the bands at different places, you can separate your feet more, which doesn't standardize it for every single time. You kind of have to make sure that you track what you did before. Maybe your feet were a little wider the last time, and you need to remember that that is what you did in order to properly progress your workouts as you get bigger and stronger. And with that, make sure you try out this method, whether you're using just the bands or the setup I have, and see if you can get some results with resistance bands at home. But that is it, so make sure you try it out and be fit and game on.